Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and once again it is time for the Q&As, and I get a few people who ask me, hey, where can I post my questions up? On the Facebook fan page, there's a link to it on the About tab on this channel for people who don't know where to find it. That's my fitness Facebook fan page. Every Thursday I open up a thread, I stick it to the top of the page, and I leave it up all the way into Sunday till I do the Q&As. So if you were curious where to ask your questions, go ahead and post them there. All right, but let's get to it. First question. Hey Jason, I was wondering about the amount of muscle growth you get from stretching a muscle. For example, I would think your traps would grow from doing farmer's walks because of the stretching. Also, Strapon Destiny talks about the stretch of a muscle developing traps from doing rack pulls. Yes, I know he's an idiot and offers terrible advice. Just wondering if what he says about stretch development is true. Thanks, man. Keep up the good work. All right, great question. And the thing is what people misunderstand when it comes to something like this is like a stretch overload causing hypertrophy. Of course it does. Of course it does. And we've got animal studies that show that in the most extreme cases, stretch overload can actually exceed by quite a bit the amount of muscle growth you can get from conventional weight training. The problem is that people assume based upon that it's somehow equal or superior to conventional weight training. And the reality is that just isn't true. The data on it shows that stretch loading of a muscle absolutely causes hypertrophy. Let's get that clear, particularly if there's progressive overload with it. So in other words, rack pulls or farmer's walks and all that stuff can absolutely cause growth stimulation in the traps. But the question becomes, when you look at the data, can it cause as much muscle growth as, say, doing shrugs? And the answer is no. Absolutely not. Shrugs done with a moderately heavy barbell have the potential to give you far more trap development. It probably double the amount of growth stimulation because of doing a full range of motion exercise for volume. Gives you more growth stimulation than a heavy stretch. And it's not saying that the heavy stretch doesn't contribute. It's not saying the heavy stretch can't help make a muscle grow, but people confuse that with it. It's somehow an amazing tool. And here's what's going on here. A lot of guys choose not to directly train like their traps, for example. And that's fine. I don't directly train my traps. I don't want super massive traps beyond the function that they give me for my deadlift. So that being said, I don't directly train my traps, and a lot of guys don't directly train their traps. We rely on our deadlifts, our rows, our overhead press to develop them. Now, if that's all you do and we don't ever do any direct work, you have a given amount of workload. If that workload is less than your maximum recoverable volume for your traps, what would happen if you were to add in some rack pulls or do farmer's walks as part of your GPP? You would probably see a little bit of additional trap growth from it, right? You probably would, as long as you had been well underneath your maximum recoverable volume for that muscle. Yeah, of course it's going to grow because you've subjected it to more overall work stimulation, but it's not the farmer's walks and the other stuff in isolation that caused significant growth. It's that they just added a cumulative effect. And again, that depends on what you're doing with your traps. If you're doing those heavy compounds and you're doing direct trap work, let's say you're doing 3 sets of 10 on shrugs once or twice a week, you probably aren't going to see any additional growth from doing those other things because you're probably going to be up near the maximum amount of volume, probably near your maximum effective volume also, in which case you're not going to see it. And people need to realize weighted stretches, just in general, can be a way to stimulate additional fatigue in a muscle if you already are doing other work for it, but they will never be able to replace doing actual direct full range of motion work for a muscle. Nothing beats that in terms of hypertrophy. And the data on that shows that. If a person really and truly say they wanted the biggest traps possible, they'd be doing tons of heavy shrugs. That's what they would do. They wouldn't go do the secondary exercises for it. If that was really their most driving important goal, that's what they would go do. So perspective. All right, next question. Decline bench and chest muscle directions as explained in Omarisufs' video. I want to know your opinion. I don't need to watch Omar's video to know this topic. This is a topic that's already been heavily discussed. It's already been heavily discussed in the online YouTube fitness community in the past. It's just been a few years. This is something I debated in the past with people like Ian McCarthy and Sebastian Sunnyd about. They get caught up in this idea that you're going to stimulate more muscle growth because you move a weight along the line of pull and angles of the muscle fibers. No, what you're going to find is that you get a more efficient line of pull. In other words, you can probably lift more weight. Does that make sense? You can probably lift more weight if you do that. In other words, a slight decline on the bench press, your chest is probably going to be more efficient at moving weight. Therefore, you're probably going to be able to bench 5 or 10 more pounds. It doesn't mean you're going to get better muscle fiber recruitment. And again, that's where people are coming up and they're taking concepts and they're running with them in a way that hasn't necessarily been proven in a lab and doesn't seem to even be true in the real world. The reality is, just because you have a line of pull that's more efficient doesn't mean you're going to stimulate more growth. What that means is that the contractile force of the muscle fibers are going to produce more weight on the other end. That's what it means. If muscle fibers are put at a disadvantaged angle, it actually means you're going to recruit more muscle fibers with a slightly lighter weight because they have to work harder. They actually have to work harder. So again, it doesn't necessarily equal anything in terms of muscle gains. It just might mean more weight on the bar. It might mean you can produce a little more force, a small amount more due to the efficiency of the angle. It doesn't equal more recruitment, and it doesn't equal more growth. And again, if you understand how muscle fibers work in rate coding and all of that, it should make sense at that point. But again, as people get caught up in these minutiae of details and not understand that while their theory sounds cute, it doesn't hold up under actual practice. It doesn't hold up under practice. And as far as declines go, there's a lot of problems with the decline bench. I'm not going to get into all that. I don't decline bench. I think for me, for my bone structure, it's a worthless exercise. If I wanted to do half reps on the bench press, which is what a decline is for me, I would just do a 2 or 3 board press. I don't need to do a decline. All right, next question. Any other vitamins you recommend? I think you recommending vitamin D and fish oil. I hear good things about supplementing with vitamin K2, but then again, it's hard to figure out the scams. You know what? It comes back to the other point. There's only 2 reasons ever to supplement a vitamin. All right. Number 1, you have an imbalanced diet. Number 2, you're in some sort of environmental condition that makes it more difficult to get. Number 2, the simplest one, that's where vitamin D3 comes in place. Sources of vitamin D3 in our diet are relatively rare. There aren't many foods that have vitamin D3 in significant quantities in them. That's why it's supplemented in so many foods. D3 is just added to milk, cereal, breads, all sorts of stuff when you go look in Western countries. Because we are oftentimes lower sunlight countries, we have people with darker skin pigmentation in our countries who are not indigenous to those regions. All right. In light of that, overall health is improved if vitamin D3 is put into food. So it's already fortified. So the ironic part is that if you eat a wide variety of foods and well-balanced diet, everything else, you may not even need to supplement the D3 because it's already been handled by food manufacturers, because this is data we've known about for years. Outside of D3, really there is no vitamin that you're going to benefit from supplementing unless you're deficient in your diet. In other words, vitamin K2. All right. Leafy greens. I mean, vitamin K2 has benefits. It has uses. It's important for health. Why do you think we tell you to eat your vegetables? But it comes back to the people who say, well, I don't want to eat vegetables. I just take the pill. And it's kind of like, wow, I mean, are you an 8-year-old child? You don't want to eat your veggies? Seriously, grown-ass men. I don't want to eat vegetables. I don't like them. It's like Cali muscle. It's absurd. Absolute absurdity. Eat your damn vegetables. Same thing. Fad diets, extreme diets, that creates a need for vitamins. Vegan diets, for example, create the need for B12. Other than 5% of the population produces their own B12, by the way. 95% of people have to get it from their diet. 5% can actually produce their own. It's weird genetic things that are out there. But overall, yeah, any of these foods, it's because people aren't eating a balanced diet. They're excluding entire food groups. They don't eat vegetables. They eat too many Pop-Tarts. That's the reason anyone gets any benefit from vitamins. So no, I don't recommend supplementing K2. Eat your veggies. Problem solved. All right, next question. How long can you run your linear periodization program? What's the next step when you're advanced? What's your intermediate strength standard? Thanks for your help, coach. That doesn't really need to be addressed ever by a cookie cutter program. Let's just be honest here. If you're an advanced lifter, you shouldn't be running a pre-written program. You need some customization. You need to be writing your own programs. You need to be hiring a coach for it. That's what you need to do. Now, truth is, 99% of people who work out will never actually need an advanced program. Let's be honest here. Most of you out there, particularly if you're not going to run any gear, do you honestly expect to get much further than a 500 deadlift? Do you honestly expect to get further than a 400 squat? You really think you're going to bench more than about 275 to 300 pounds? I mean, think about that for a moment. In terms of just basic strength, no, most of you aren't unless you go get into powerlifting, unless you really push it to the limit. You're probably not ever going to need an advanced program. Intermediate programs are more than capable of getting someone with average genetics to those goals, eventually drug-free. All right, my intermediate program, Mad Cows, the Texas method, any of those can be used even as power building programs, not necessarily just pure strength programs. You can be a power builder, which is what I recommend. And most people who've been in the game a long time know that people who don't blast a bunch of gear really need to stay away from traditional bodybuilding programs anyways. You can get further as a natty doing mostly power building style training. Big heavy barbell movements, get strong, do accessories to bring up your weak points, isolation work to bring up your weak points. Most of you guys, that's what's going to work. The vast majority of people out there aren't going to need advanced programs. I don't have set standards. You'll know when you're advanced. You could, in theory, most of you could run an intermediate program for the next decade, right? You'll probably get to your goals until you actually have a need for an advanced program, in which case you go find coaches who write advanced programs, or you read your own books. By that point, if you've been training 5 to 10 years really hard, I'm going to assume you've read at least a few books on training programming. You've probably read practical programming. You've probably read super training. You've probably read all of those books, right? You probably have listened to what all the top coaches have said. You've had, you've had close to a decade of lifting experience and listening to coaches and people. You should have a good enough idea to know where to go with your training at that point. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time in part 2.